The first tear traced a cold path down her cheek, and Elara did not brush it away. She stood at the very heart of the forbidden forest, in a small clearing silvered by moonlight, her bare feet buried in the cool, damp moss. The air hummed with a magic that made her skin prickle, an ancient watchful energy that should have sent her fleeing. But the quiet here was a balm compared to the roaring silence of the palace. Here she could breathe. Here she could let the fracture in her chest ache openly. The decree had been read at dusk, its words a formal, public carving of her heart. The bond between her and King Caelan was officially barren, a political union yielding no magical heir. By the laws of the realm, it was grounds for quiet annulment. She was a queen of paper about to be gently, irrevocably set aside. She had walked here past the guarded boundary stones, because the forest peril was a tangible thing she thought she understood. It was a cleaner danger than the pity in the courtier's eyes, sharper than the hollow space in the royal bedchamber her husband had never entered. She wore only a thin sleeping shift, the night air kissing her skin with a chill she welcomed. The towering, dark-barked trees seemed to lean in, listening to the ragged rhythm of her breath. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're from. If this story moves you, please subscribe. Tomorrow I have a special story for you. Unseen from a high ridge where the ancient oaks grew twisted and thick, he watched. King Caelan was a silhouette of shadow and restrained power, every muscle locked in a tension that had become his perpetual state. His golden eyes, luminous in the dark, tracked her every slight movement, the shudder of her shoulders as she fought a sob, the way her fingers clutched at the fabric over her heart. The wolf within him strained against his ribs, a silent, frantic echo to her pain. He had followed her the moment his spies reported her heading for the forest border, a curse on his lips and a terror in his throat no one would ever witness. He saw the way the bioluminescent fungi pulsed softly near her feet, as if in sympathy. He saw the spectral owls still their flight in the branches above her, their heads cocked. The forest itself did not threaten her. It recognized her, and that was the most dangerous thing of all. Down in the clearing, Elara sank to her knees, the moss yielding beneath her. She tilted her face up to the sliver of visible sky, the moonlight catching the wet tracks on her face. "Why?" she whispered to the uncaring stars, her voice a broken thing swallowed by the immense quiet. "What is wrong with me?" The question was a blade twisted in Caelan's gut. "Nothing. By the gods, there is absolutely nothing wrong with you." The words were a roar in his skull, but his jaw remained clenched, his hands fisted at his sides. He could not go to her. He could not comfort her. The political web was too fragile, the secret he carried too volatile. To touch her, to claim her as his wolf screamed to do, would be to unleash a chaos that could destroy kingdoms. Her mortal soul, unaware of the bond that had snapped into place the first moment he saw her, was a precious, fragile thing in a world of predatory magic and sharpened thrones. A twig snapped in the undergrowth. Elara flinched, her head whipping around, eyes wide with a fear that was finally, blessedly, about something other than her own grief. Caelan's gaze sharpened, scanning the darkness. A low, territorial growl vibrated in his chest, a sound no human could hear. From the deeper blackness between the trees, 2 points of ruddy light appeared eyes. A forest wraith, drawn by the scent of sorrow and vulnerability. It began to seep forward, a formless smudge of malice. Elara scrambled back, her breath catching. This was the danger she had sought, and now that it was here, a raw, primal courage ignited in her. She would not die cowering. She rose to her feet, her back straight, chin lifted in a defiance that made Caelan's heart clench with agonized pride. He moved, not as a king, but as the Alpha. A blur of midnight and fury descended from the ridge, a shadow that solidified between her and the advancing creature. He didn't transform. His innate power was a suffocating wave that rolled out from him. The wraith hissed, the red eyes flickering with uncertainty before fading back into the nothingness from which it came. Elara froze, her defiance morphing into shock. She saw only his broad back, the dark leather tunic straining over shoulders that seemed to block out the world, the fall of his black hair against his neck. She knew that silhouette, that aura of absolute authority, even before he slowly turned. The world narrowed to the space between them, charged and humming. Moonlight fell across his face, etching the severe lines of his brow, the hard cut of his jaw, and those impossible, glowing eyes fixed on her with an intensity that stripped her bare. "Caelan," she breathed, his name a question and an accusation. He took a single step toward her, and the air crackled. His gaze was a physical touch, sweeping over her tear-stained face, her thin shift, her bare feet. It was not the detached, polite look of a sovereign. It was hungry, desperate, and full of a pain that mirrored her own. "You," he said, his voice a low gravel that seemed to rise from the earth itself, "are not allowed to be here." It was a king's command. But beneath it, layered in that single rough sentence, she heard something else, a possessiveness so profound it stole the breath from her lungs. He wasn't just forbidding his queen from entering a dangerous wood. He was forbidding her, the center of his silent, tormented universe, from leaving the circle of his protection. She stared up at him, the man who had never so much as taken her hand, who had upheld a wall of courtly decorum between them for a year. Here, in the Forbidden's dark, that wall was gone. All that remained was the electric space between their bodies, the raw exposure in his eyes, and the terrifying, glorious realization. He had been watching. He had followed her. And the look on his face now was not one of a king disappointed in a barren queen. It was the look of a man who had just seen his most sacred vow almost shattered. "Why?" she whispered again, but this time the question was for him alone. Caelan's control was a fraying wire. He could see the pulse hammering in her throat, smell the salt of her tears and the sweet, unique scent of her skin. His hand twitched at his side, aching to reach out, to pull her into the shelter of his body and never let go. The confession, the truth of the bond, the political poison that would flow if he acted, it all warred behind his eyes. He took another step, closing the distance until she had to tilt her head back further to hold his gaze. The heat of him radiated against the chill of her skin. "You should be afraid of this forest, Elara," he murmured, her name a forbidden's caress on his tongue. "But you should be infinitely more afraid of me. This story took us a long time." If you like it, subscribe. Now, back to the story. His words hung in the air between them, a vow and a warning woven together, infinitely more afraid of me. The heat of his body, so close, was a stark contrast to the forest's chill and the icy disbelief locking Elara as limbs. She could see the conflict now, a storm in his golden eyes, not just anger, but a raw, untamed anguish that mirrored the ache in her own soul. "Afraid of you." Her voice was steadier than she felt, a thread of defiance pulled tight. "You've given me no reason for fear, Your Majesty." Only indifference. A flinch, almost imperceptible, tightened the skin around his eyes. The title, formal and cold in this wild place, was a weapon she hadn't known she could wield. He looked as if she had struck him. Indifference. He repeated the word, tasting its bitterness. His gaze dropped to her lips, then back to her eyes, and the heat in it scorched away any pretense of detachment. "You think my distance is indifference? What else am I to think?" The pain broke through, sharp and ragged. A year of silence across the dining table, of a closed door to your chambers, of courtiers whispering about the barren queen you won't even touch. She wrapped her arms around herself, not from cold, but to hold the pieces together. Tonight, they read the decree. And you said nothing. You just let them. The truth of it, spoken aloud in the sacred, judging quiet of the forest, was a humiliation that burned worse than fear. She expected him to turn away, to rebuild the wall of regal silence. He did the opposite. He closed the last step between them. Elara's breath hitched. He didn't touch her, but his proximity was an invasion, a claim. She could see the faint scar along his jaw, the dark fringe of his lashes, the impossible dilation of his pupils within the radiant gold. The scent of him, pine, night air, and something deeply wild enveloped her. "Every night," he said, his voice a low, visceral rumble that seemed to vibrate in her bones. That door was open. You never tried. The shock was so absolute, it left her dizzy. Open? A crack, an invitation, a test. His jaw worked. I waited. I listened for your footsteps. I told myself that if you came to me, even once, if you showed a single spark of desire for the man and not the crown. He trailed off, the admission hanging in the air, more intimate than any touch. Elara's mind reeled. She remembered the heavy oak door always firmly shut, or had it been? Had she, in her own hurt and presumption, never dared to look closely? Had she accepted the rejection as fact before it was ever truly offered? You wanted me to beg? The words were a whisper laced with shame. I wanted you to want. The control he wore like armor finally fractured. The Alpha's power swelled, a pressure in the air that made the very leaves tremble. I wanted a choice, Elara, not a duty performed, not a queen submitting to her king. I needed to know that if I reached for you, you wouldn't flinch from the monster you'd find. Monster, the word echoed. She saw it then not just the king, but the wolf. The primal, possessive, terrifyingly beautiful truth of him laid bare. This was the secret he kept from the court, the reason for the careful distance. It wasn't her. It was him. He'd been protecting her from himself. Before she could form a thought, a sound shattered the moment, the distant, mournful howl of a wolf, answered by another, closer. Then a different sound. The metallic clash of weapons and a shout from the direction of the palace grounds. The real world, with its dangers and duties, rushed back in. Caelan's head snapped up, his body coiling into instant, predatory alertness. The vulnerability vanished, replaced by the lethal focus of a sovereign. The border patrol, he muttered. They've tracked something or been tracked. In one fluid motion, he shrugged off his heavy leather outer coat. Before she could protest, he draped it around her shoulders. It was warm from his body, impossibly large, and the weight of it, the scent of him now hugging her skin, was a shock that stole her breath more effectively than any command. Stay behind me, he ordered, his voice leaving no room for argument. He didn't wait for her agreement, turning to face the direction of the noise, placing his body squarely between her and the threat. But the threat, it seemed, was coming from everywhere. From the thicket to their left, 3 palace guards stumbled into the clearing, their uniforms torn, faces etched with panic and the eerie glow of enchantment. Behind them, slinking from the shadows, were not wolves, but Vargran-shifting, wolf-like creatures of dark magic, their eyes burning with malevolent green fire. They were creatures of the northern wastes, never seen this deep in the kingdom. A political attack then. An assassination attempt made to look like a forest tragedy. Your Majesty. One guard yelled, spotting Caelan. Ambush! They're hurting us. A Vargran lunged. Caelan moved faster than sight. He didn't transform fully, but his hand shot out, and a crackle of raw, golden energy slammed into the creature, throwing it back into the trees with a yelp of pain. It was a display of power that was both awe-inspiring and terrifying. This was the strength he kept leashed within stone walls. Elara stood frozen, not with terror, but with a clarifying, cold focus. She was the queen. This was her fight, too. As another Vargran circled, aiming for a guard's exposed back, she did not scream. She bent, seized a fallen branch thick as her arm, and stepped out from behind Caelan. Elara, no. His roar was pure panic. The Vargran turned, seeing easier prey. It snarled, drool dripping from crystalline fangs, and charged. Time slowed. Elara saw the beast's muscles coil, saw the guard struggling to rise. She felt the weight of the branch, the heavier weight of the king's coat on her shoulders. And she felt not fear, but a furious protective rush, for her people, for this kingdom that was hers in name only, for the man who had just bared his soul. She swung. The branch connected with the creature's shoulder with a jarring thud, deflecting its lunge. It wasn't a killing blow, but it was enough. The guard gained his feet and plunged his sword into its side. Caelan was a blur of fury. He dispatched the remaining 2 Vargran with brutal, efficient strikes, his movements a dance of lethal grace. When the last creature fell, dissolving into wisps of shadow, the clearing fell silent again, heavy with the scent of ozone and blood. He turned to her. His chest was heaving, not from exertion, but from the aftermath of a terror far greater than any battle. His eyes blazed as they took her in standing firm, the makeshift club still in her white-knuckled hand, his coat swallowing her frame. He crossed the distance in 2 strides. His hands came up, not to strike, but to frame her face. The touch was electric, searing. It was the first time he had ever truly touched her. "You," he breathed, his thumb stroking a smudge of dirt from her cheekbone, a gesture so tender it shattered her completely. "You fearless, impossible woman. I told you to stay behind me." His touch was undoing her. The confession, the violence, the shocking gentleness of his hands, it was too much. "They were going to kill your guard," she said, her voice trembling. "I would burn the entire world to ash if it meant they never made you raise a weapon in your own defense." He said, the words a raw, brutal truth. The intensity in his eyes promised just that. It was not the placid affection of a storybook king. It was the consuming fire of an alpha who had found his mate. The guards were staring, their expressions a mix of shock, awe, and dawning understanding. The dynamic had irrevocably shifted. They had not just seen their king fight. They had seen their queen stand her ground. And they had seen him touch her as if she were the only solid thing in a spinning world. Caelan's eyes never left hers. The moment stretched, thick with unsaid everything. The political ramifications, the danger of the bond, the shattered protocol, all of it paled against the reality of his skin on hers. Then a new voice, cold and sharp as a shard of ice, cut from the forest edge. "A touching display, brother." But terribly inconvenient for the narrative. Elara turned, Caelan's hands slowly falling from her face. Emerging from the trees was a man she knew too well, Caelan, Caelan's half-brother, and the kingdom's most powerful duke. His smile was thin, his eyes calculating as they flicked from the dead Vargran to Elara, wrapped in the king's coat, to Caelan's unmistakably possessive stance beside her. "I came with a hunting party after hearing the alarms," Caelan said, his tone slick. "To think we'd find the Barren Queen in the Forbidden Forest, defended so passionately by the king who supposedly has no interest in her." His gaze settled on Elara, a predatory gleam in his eye. "The court will be so very fascinated by this, as will the northern ambassadors who just arrived, wondering why their pets have been slain." The cliffhanger was no longer a private wound or a whispered secret. It was a public political blade poised to fall. Caelan had moved to protect her, and in doing so had handed his enemies everything they needed. Elara looked from Caelan's triumphant face to Caelan's, which had hardened into a mask of icy, ruthless authority. The night of raw truth was over. The Game of Thrones had just begun, and she was now at the very center of the board. The air, still humming with the aftermath of violence, turned to ice at Caelan's words. Elara felt the shift in Caelan as if it were her own, a withdrawal not of fear, but of power condensing into something sharp, strategic, and deadly. His hand, which had been moments from returning to her skin, fell to his side, fist clenched. The tender, tormented man was gone, replaced entirely by the Alpha King. Yet, the protective circle of his energy remained, a tangible force holding Caelan's insinuations at bay. "The narrative, brother," Caelan said, his voice devoid of all previous emotion, a flat blade of sound, "is that my queen took an ill-advised walk. My guards and I intercepted a northern incursion on our own soil. A clear act of war. The only fascination will be in determining the appropriate retaliation." His golden eyes pinned Caelan, stripping away the duke's pleasant veneer. "Unless you find the defense of this kingdom inconvenient." A masterstroke. He reframed the entire scene, turning a scandal into a casus belli, transforming Elara from a vulnerable liability into a catalyst for royal action. Elara, still wrapped in the profound warmth of his coat, felt the lesson seep into her bones. This was how power was wielded, not just with strength, but with ruthless perception. Caelan's smile tightened, but the gleam in his eyes only sharpened. He'd planted a seed. He could afford to wait for it to grow. "Of course, Your Majesty. My only concern is for the Queen's safety. The forest is no place for delicate things. His gaze swept over Elara, dismissing her act of defiance as a fluke. Shall my men escort her back to the palace? You must have much to discuss with your captains. It was a direct attempt to separate them, to isolate her with his allies, who would doubtless ply her with questions and veiled threats during the journey. No. The word from Caelan was final. He turned to Elara, and for the briefest moment, the king's mask slipped, revealing the possessive, anxious Alpha beneath. The queen walks with me. He did not offer his arm. He simply stated it as law, then began moving toward the palace path, his stride assuming she would follow. It was not a request, but a claiming. After a heartbeat's hesitation, a silent scream of her own pride, Elara moved. The guards and a sullen Caelan with his hunting party fell in behind them. She walked at Caelan's side, not a step behind as protocol demanded, the weight of his coat a constant warm reminder of the secret they now shared. The journey back was silent but screamingly loud with tension. She could feel the stares, the calculations. She kept her head high, the scent of pine and king filling her senses, her mind racing. The door had been open. He had waited. They reached the palace's postern gate, where a swarm of anxious attendants and stern-faced generals awaited. Crisis had stripped away the usual courtly pretense. Caelan stopped, turning to face the gathered crowd. The northern Vargren have crossed the Black River, he announced, his voice carrying over the courtyard. They attacked your queen and her guard within sight of the palace walls. This is no border skirmish. Convene the war council in 1 hour. His eyes found Caelan in the throng. You will attend, brother. Your timely arrival in the forest will be of interest to the discussion. The dismissal was clear. As the crowd erupted into controlled chaos, Caelan's hand found the small of Elara's back. The touch, through the leather, was searingly intimate, a silent command and a question. He guided her not toward the public halls, but into a secluded, vine-covered archway leading to the private royal gardens. Once shrouded in night-blooming jasmine, he faced her. The official mask was back, but it was strained, cracks of gold fire showing through. You will go to your chambers, he stated. You will allow the healer to examine you. You will speak to no one without my guard at your door. Do you understand? Elara met his gaze, the defiance that had fueled her swing in the forest rising again. I am not a child to be ordered to her room after a scrape. They attacked my home. I have a right to the council. A low growl vibrated in his chest, a purely animal sound of frustration. Elara, what you have is a target on your back? Caelan's little performance ensures that by dawn, every faction in this court will be dissecting what happened in that clearing. They will see you either as a weakness I foolishly protect, or as a weapon to use against me. Your presence in that council chamber will turn strategy into theater, and hiding me away does not? She challenged, stepping closer, emboldened by the lingering adrenaline and the scent of him. It makes me look like a secret, like a shameful wound you're trying to stitch up. You just told the entire courtyard it was an act of war against their queen. Let the queen stand beside the king when he answers it? He stared at her, a muscle ticking in his jaw. She saw the war within him, the Alpha's desperate need to stash his mate in a den of absolute safety, and the king's reluctant recognition of a sound political tactic. It is a den of wolves, he said finally, his voice gruff. Then it is a good thing I've just had a lesson from the Alpha, she replied, her voice quiet but steel firm. For a long moment he simply looked at her, his gaze tracing the lines of her face as if memorizing a map of a suddenly unfamiliar, perilous land. The longing was back, a live wire between them, tangled now with respect and a dawning, terrified hope. 1 hour, he conceded, the word ripped from him. You may sit. You will not speak unless I address you directly. You will be a symbol, not a participant. Is that clear? It was a compromise, a crack in his absolute authority granted to her. She nodded. Clear. He reached out then, not for her hand, but for the lapel of the coat she still wore. His fingers brushed the leather near her throat, a gesture that felt inexplicably more intimate than a kiss. This stays on, he murmured. Let them all see you wearing it. It was a statement, a branding. Her heart hammered against her ribs. The hour passed in a blur of hurried preparation. Her maid, Lyra, said nothing about the king's coat, her eyes wide as she helped Elara change into a gown of deep twilight blue, severe and regal. She left the coat draped over her shoulders like a mantle of office. When she entered the war council chamber, a vast, stone-walled room lit by flickering braziers, every conversation died. She ignored them, walking to the high table where Caelan sat upon a carved throne of obsidian. A smaller, elegant chair had been placed at his right hand. It was always empty. Tonight, she sat in it. The temperature in the room seemed to drop. Caelan, seated with the other dukes, watched with a viper's smile. The generals looked uncertain. Caelan did not acknowledge her arrival with words. He simply waited until she was seated, then gave a minute, almost imperceptible nod to the head general. Begin. The discussion was a torrent of troop movements, supply lines, and accusations. Evidence was presented tracts, the unique magical residue of the Vargren. Through it all, Elara sat perfectly still, a queen of ice and shadow, her hands folded in her lap beneath the table. She listened, learning more about the kingdom's vulnerabilities in that hour than she had in a year of state dinners. Then Caelan spoke. The attack's precision is concerning. They found the queen in a remote part of the forest with remarkable speed, almost as if they had guidance from within our borders. He let the implication hang, his eyes sliding toward Elara before returning to Caelan. Perhaps we should look inward for treachery before we lash outward. The silence was absolute. It was an elegant, deadly move. Not accusing the king, but the mysterious, foreign-born queen found alone in the Forbidden Woods. Caelan's power filled the room, a silent, oppressive weight. Before he could eviscerate his brother with words, Elara felt a strange, cold clarity settle over her. A symbol does not speak, but a queen can act. She did not stand. She did not raise her voice. She simply turned her head slowly and looked directly at Caelan. She remembered the feel of the branch in her hands, the snarl of the Vargren, the calculating look in her brother-in-law's eyes in the clearing. The only guidance they needed, Duke Caelan, she said, her voice clear and calm, cutting through the thick silence, was the scent of opportunity. They sniffed out division. They smelled fear. She paused, letting her words, spoken in the citadel of power, find their mark. They will find, as I did tonight, that this kingdom is not divided, and its heart does not fear. It defends. She looked back to the head general, as if the matter were settled. Please continue with the troop deployments, General. My husband's strategy for the northern ridges seems the most prudent. A beat of stunned silence. Then a low rumble of approval from a grizzled general at the far end of the table. Another nodded. Caelan had not moved, but she felt the shockwave that went through him, a tremor of pure, unadulterated pride and fear. She had broken his rule. She had spoken. And she had, with a few sentences, dismantled Caelan's insinuation and aligned herself firmly with the king's authority. The meeting continued, the tension shifted. She was no longer just a symbol. She was a player. When the council finally adjourned, Caelan rose. The queen and I will review the final plans. Leave us. The room emptied, Caelan casting one last inscrutable look behind him. The heavy doors thudded shut. Alone in the firelit cavern, Caelan turned to her. He didn't speak. He just looked at her, his expression unreadable. You told me not to speak, she said, suddenly unsure. I did. He took a step toward her, then another. He stopped before her chair, looking down. You wore my coat. You sat in my council. You spoke with my authority. He leaned down, bracing his hands on the arms of her chair, caging her in. His voice dropped to a whisper, laced with awe and a hint of fury. Who are you? Elara's breath caught. The heat of him, the intensity, was overwhelming. I am the woman who slept alone in the Forbidden Forest, she whispered back, holding his blazing gaze. And the woman who realized she was never alone. You watched. You waited. You followed. Her courage, born of battle and politics, crystallized into a single aching truth. So tell me, Caelan, who are you? The king who won't touch his queen, or the man who would burn the world for her. He flinched as if struck. The careful distance he had maintained for a year lay in ruins at their feet. The political consequences, the danger of the bond, the shadow of his beast, all of it was there in his eyes, warring with a need so profound it shook the air. Slowly, so slowly, he lifted a hand. His fingers, calloused and warm, brushed a stray strand of hair from her cheek, then traced the line of her jaw. It was a touch of reverence and desperate hunger. His thumb grazed her lower lip. "I am," he murmured, his breath mingling with hers, "the man who is about to make a catastrophic mistake," and he closed the final impossible distance. His lips met hers. It was not a gentle kiss. It was a claiming, a confession, a year of longing unleashed. It was fire and solace, power and surrender. The world dissolved into the taste of him, the feel of his hands sliding into her hair, the low growl of pure satisfaction that vibrated from his chest into hers. Elara melted, her hands rising to clutch at the front of his tunic, her own whimper of release lost in his mouth. This was the truth. This was the bond she had starved for. This was the heart of the forbidden forest, and it was not in the trees, but here in him. When he finally pulled back, both of them were breathless. His forehead rested against hers, his eyes shut tight as if in pain. "The mistake," he breathed, "is that I cannot take it back, and I do not want to. And now—" He opened his eyes. The gold darkened with passion and dread. "Now they will truly come for you." A frantic knocking shattered the moment. "Your Majesty!" A messenger from the north under a flag of truce. "He demands an audience with the king, and the queen who wears the Alpha's skin." The words iced the fire in their veins. Caelan straightened, his face hardening into a mask of lethal calm. But his hand found hers, intertwining their fingers in a grip that was both promise and anchor. The cliffhanger was no longer political. It was primal. The kiss had been a declaration of war more definitive than any slain Vargran. The outside world had felt the shift in the bond, and it was now knocking at their door. The messenger's words hung in the council chamber like the echo of a tolling bell. The queen who wears the Alpha skin. They knew. The northern kingdoms, who dealt in shadows and ancient magics, had felt the shift in the cosmic balance the moment Caelan's lips had touched hers. Their bond, now awakened and acknowledged, was a beacon in the dark. Caelan's hand tightened around Elara's, his grip the only anchor in a suddenly tilting world. The tenderness of a moment before was gone, replaced by a predatory stillness. He looked at their joined hands, then at her face, his eyes holding a silent, fervent question. "Are you with me?" Elara answered by squeezing back, her own fear crystallizing into a sharp, clear resolve. She had walked into the forest to feel a cleaner pain. She had stepped into the council to prove her worth. Now the deepest forbidden truth was out. There was no going back. She met his gaze and gave a single, firm nod. "Send the messenger to the glass hall," Caelan commanded, his voice stripped of all but absolute authority. "Under heavy guard. The queen and I will receive him." The glass hall was a place of brutal transparency. A long, narrow chamber with one wall made entirely of enchanted, unbreakable obsidian glass overlooking the churning northern mountains. It was used for negotiations where power, not diplomacy, was the primary language. To be summoned, there was a statement. Elara walked there at Caelan's side, his coat still around her shoulders. They did not speak. The corridor was a river of silent tension, lined with guards whose loyalty was now being tested in real time. She could feel the weight of the court's gaze from every shadowed archway, hear the frantic whispers swirling in their wake. The barren queen. The king's coat, the kiss witnessed by a servant. The glass hall was lit by cold blue witchlight. At the far end, framed by the dramatic, storm-laden vista, stood the northern messenger. He was not what she expected. No furs or brutish armor. He was tall, gaunt, dressed in gray robes the color of forgotten ash. His eyes were the pale silver of a dead moon. Caelan led her to the twin obsidian thrones, but did not sit. He stood before a king in his citadel, with Elara standing steadfastly beside her own. The message was clear. They were united at the precipice. "You bear a message," Caelan stated. No greeting, no title offered. The ash-robed man bowed a shallow, mocking tilt of his head. His voice was like dry leaves scraping stone. "King Caelan and Queen Elara, the whisperer of the northern reaches, sends his congratulations. A dormant bond awakened is a rare and volatile flower. It changes the calculus of many things. Get to the point," Caelan growled, the sound tinged with the edge of his wolf. "The point is one of mutually assured preservation," the messenger said, his pale eyes fixed on Elara with a fascination that made her skin crawl. "Your union, now potent, makes you a target. Not just for my master, but for every power that thrives on chaos. The Vargren sent earlier were a crude probe. A test of your isolation, they failed. You are no longer isolated. You are bonded. And a bonded Alpha King is both infinitely more powerful and infinitely more vulnerable." His lips stretched into a thin smile. "My master proposes a treaty, a non-aggression pact, in exchange for one small assurance." "What assurance?" Elara asked, her voice steady, cutting through the tense air. "She would not be spoken about as if she were not there." The messenger's smile widened. "That the bond remains. Contained that you, Queen Elara, submit to a magical binding that would dampen its more provocative signals to the outside world. For your own safety, of course. A simple ceremony. You would remain queen in title. The king would retain his strength. And the North would have no interest in a kingdom radiating no tantalizing mate bond magic. It was a masterpiece of cruelty. They were not demanding her death or abdication. They were demanding she willingly mutilate the very connection she had just discovered to make herself palatable and visible and safe, to return to a gilded silence. It was the political, magical equivalent of Caelan's indifference, formalized and sanctified. Caelan's rage was a physical force, a heat that radiated from him, causing the witchlights to flicker. "You propose I cage my own queen? That I deny the bond my ancestors waited centuries for? I propose you protect your kingdom from the storm your heart has summoned," the messenger replied smoothly. "The whisperer is not the only one listening. Without our pact, others will come. Darker things, drawn to the scent of your completed bond like sharks to blood, we offer a shield. All it costs is a whisper." Elara's heart hammered against her ribs. The temptation was a cold, sickening wave. Safety for her people. Stability for Caelan. The return to a predictable, painless life. All for the price of her soul. The soul that had only just begun to sing. She looked at Caelan. His profile was carved from stone, but she saw the agony in the set of his jaw, the tremor in the hand he kept at his side. He was the alpha. His every instinct was to protect his mate, even from this. He would be weighing the fate of thousands against the fire in his own blood. He turned his head, his golden eyes finding hers. In them, she saw no calculation, only a desperate questioning horror. He would not order her. He would not make this choice for her. After a lifetime of bearing the weight of every decision alone, he was placing this one in her hands. It was the greatest, most terrifying gift he could give. The silence stretched. The messenger watched, confident in the inevitable logic of fear. Elara thought of the empty bedchamber, the silent dinners, the decree of barrenness. She thought of the moss under her bare feet, the watchful peace of the forbidden trees, the burning gold of Caelan's eyes in the dark as he called her fearless. She thought of the branch in her hand, the snarl of the Vargren, the rightness of standing her ground. She was not the same woman who had walked into that forest. She stepped forward, one step ahead of her king. She addressed the messenger, her voice ringing clear in the glass-walled hall. "Tell your whisperer this," she said, and every word was a nail in the coffin of her old, quiet life. "The bond is not a signal to be dampened. It is not a whisper. It is a roar. And it is mine." She turned slightly, her gaze sweeping to Caelan, including him, claiming him before this enemy. "It is ours. We do not hide from the storms we summon. We become the storm. If your master or any other power is drawn to our light, let them come. They will find not a vulnerable flame, but a wildfire. The gasp in the room was not audible. It was felt. The guards stiffened. Caelan went utterly still behind her, a statue of shock and burgeoning, ferocious pride. The messenger's smug facade cracked, revealing cold fury beneath. A pretty speech, little queen. It will make fine poetry for the bards who sing of your falling kingdom. Leave, Caelan's voice cut in, deeper and more final than the closing of a tomb. It was no longer the voice of a man negotiating. It was the voice of the Alpha, the king, the bondmaid, his power amplified and focused by her defiance. It vibrated with a command that could not be disobeyed. Take our answer to your master, and tell him the next creature he sends across our border will be returned to him in pieces so small, not even his magic will find them all. The messenger paled, the silver in his eyes flickering with genuine fear. He had not expected this unity. He bowed a jerky, hurried motion and was escorted out, the deal and its false safety rejected. As the doors sealed, the immense energy in the hall seemed to collapse inward, centering on the two of them. Caelan turned to her. The look on his face was one of utter devastation and awe. Elara, her name was a prayer and a lament. You gave me the choice, she said, her bravery wavering now that the audience was gone, leaving only him. Did you think I would choose a cage? I thought, he said, striding forward and closing the distance between them, his hands rising to cradle her face, that I would have to watch you choose one to save us all, and I would have had to let you. And it would have destroyed me. He kissed her again. This kiss was different, not a claiming of desperation, but a sealing of a pact. It was deep, reverent, and full of a shared terrifying future. When they broke apart, they were both breathing as one. The storm is coming, she whispered against his lips. Let it come, he murmured back, his forehead against hers. We face it together, as king and queen, as Alpha, and he hesitated, the sacred word hovering between them. Mate, Elara finished for him, the word feeling ancient and right on her tongue. A slow, true smile, the first she had ever seen, touched his lips. It transformed him, banishing the last of the cold king, revealing the man beneath weary, fierce, and utterly hers. But the moment of peace was brief. The door to the hall burst open not with ceremony, but with violence. Caelan stood there, his composure shattered, his face a mask of frantic rage. Behind him, a dozen guards loyal to him had their swords drawn, holding off the royal guard. You fools! Caelan spat, pointing at Caelan and Elara. You've doomed us all for a feeling. The northern hordes will descend. The bond makes you a target he can't ignore. Caelan moved Elara behind him with a gentle, unyielding push. You seem well informed on the Whisperer's intentions, brother, he said, his voice lethally quiet. Almost as if you were counting on his treaty. The truth dawned in the hall. Caelan's timely arrival in the forest, his push for separation, his hints of internal treachery. He hadn't just been an opportunist. He had been in league with the North, engineering a crisis where he could emerge as the sane. Bargaining savior, likely with Elara removed and Caelan weakened. I was saving the kingdom from your heart's stupidity. Caelan yelled, drawing his own sword. That mortal has made you weak. The bond has made you blind. I challenge you, brother. For the throne. For the sake of our people. Here and now, gasps echoed. A formal challenge within the glass hall was unprecedented. Law dictated it must be answered. Caelan looked at Elara, a world of apology in his eyes. She shook her head once, fiercely. Do what you must. He stepped forward, shrugging off his royal overtunic, standing before his brother in simple leathers. I accept your challenge, Caelan. But know this, you do not challenge just your king. You challenge the bonded Alpha, and his mate. As he spoke the final word, the change began. It was not the full, terrifying shift into the wolf, but a partial, majestic transformation. His canines lengthened, his nails became dark, curved talons, and his golden eyes blazed with a primordial fire. Power rolled off him in waves, the bond between him and Elara acting as a conduit, amplifying his strength. The air itself thickened. Caelan, for all his scheming, paled. He had not calculated this. He lunged, his sword a blur of silver. The fight was short, brutal, and utterly one-sided. Caelan moved with a speed that defied sight, disarming Caelan with a swipe that shattered the sword, then pinning him to the cold glass wall with a single hand around his throat. The betrayal, the threat to Elara, the years of venom, it was all in that grip. Mercy. Caelan choked, his feet dangling. Caelan looked past him to Elara. The question was in his eyes again. This, too, he would leave to her. Justice or mercy? Elara walked forward, the eyes of the stunned court upon her. She looked at Caelan's purple face, at the fear in his eyes. He had wanted her bound, silent, and gone. She stopped beside Caelan, her voice calm. Mercy, she said. But not for you. For the kingdom that should not see its princes slaughter each other. She looked at Caelan. Strip him of his titles. Let him live with the consequences of his betrayal and exile, not in glory. Let every whisper he hears be a reminder of the bond he tried to break. Caelan held her gaze, the fury in his own slowly banked by her wisdom. He dropped Caelan, who collapsed, gasping to the floor. You heard your queen, Caelan declared, his voice echoing. Take him to the border. He is banished. Should he ever return, the mercy ends. As guards dragged a broken Caelan away, Caelan turned to Elara. The partial transformation receded, leaving only the man, weary and etched with new lines, but his eyes were clear. He offered her his arm, not as a king to a queen, but as a partner. Together they walked from the glass hall, past the bowed heads of the court, past the remnants of the old world they had just shattered. They did not go to her chambers or his. They walked, hand in hand, to the doors leading to the royal gardens, and beyond them, to the edge of the forbidden forest. They stopped at the boundary stone. The forest was no longer a place of escape, but a part of their story. The first rays of dawn were piercing the night, painting the sky in hues of rose and gold. It begins today, Caelan said softly, looking at the lights spreading over his kingdom. The real war. The real reign. Elara leaned into his side, the warmth of him seeping through his coat, which she still wore. Let it begin, she said. You're not alone in the watch. And I'm not alone in the forest. He turned and pulled her into his embrace, holding her as the sun rose, bathing them both in a new and uncertain light. The Alpha King and his queen, bonded at last, their hearts a united front against the gathering storm. The Forbiddance had been claimed. The Alone had found their whole. And the night of watching was over. 2 more great stories are next. Don't miss them. Subscribe and turn on notifications.